Hello and welcome to a new video. Today is Sunday the 7th of August 2016. It is currently 1827 hours Central European Time. I understand and I'm fully aware of that you will hear a rather irritating noise in the background. That is the fan of my Mac. You might want to go sue the people who did the thermal design of the iMac 2009. There is nothing I can do against it, so please bear with me regardless of that hissing noise you hear in the background. This video has one single topic, namely the future of DC Comics as some people out there know it. I want to start off and completely freak people out so that they know what I'm talking about. What you see here is the flag of a new country. In reality, this has nothing to do with comic book fiction. A new country called Freiland, which is a German name. If you translate it into English, it would mean free land, though Freiland insists on not being translated into English. I give you a map of Europe. This is a redesigned Europe, and I will get to the color coding a little later, but all you need to know is that this here country actually is Freiland. This is the successor country to several former individual countries, such as the Czech Republic, the Slovak Republic, actually it's not a republic, Slovakia, Hungary, parts of former Austria, large parts of former Austria, smaller parts of former Italy, a minor part of former Germany, and some parts from former Poland. That all together forms a new country. Not all that new, the country's been around for a while, even though you might have never heard of it because certain people out there suppress the information on this. But this country has been around a while, and it is called Freiland. Now, Freiland has been formed in order to battle those people out there in the world who for decades and decades and decades and decades by now have made use of inhumane technologies with which to completely and utterly manipulate, suppress, subdue, and enslave all mankind. These are technologies down the line of remote neural monitoring, basically thought control, behavior control, and so on and so forth. And Freiland is the nation that arose out of the ashes, to be precise, out of the ashes of ex-Austria. Because I myself, as the founder of this country, I am from Vienna in Austria, as you know it. It's actually Vienna and Freiland now. And I declared Austria history quite a while ago, just because I understood what the local filth are actually doing and have been doing for decades and decades to not just the population of their own little country, but to much of Europe and much of the world, because the local filth is deeply interwoven with other filth elsewhere, especially, unfortunately, also a whole lot of filth across the pond over in North America, in the USA in particular. What is this to do with DC Comics? Now, I am fighting for the liberation of mankind, which means simply the complete and utter abolishing of all types of inhumane technologies. And after that, there will be this country here holding certain other people responsible for that. Now the problem is, it is not governments that could be held responsible, because a whole lot of countries, as you know them, Europe is a nice example, much better than North America. There's a lot of countries in Europe that came into existing when the former Eastern Bloc fell apart, or when the USSR, for instance, fell apart, that ever since day one of their lives as these individual countries have only taken such shape because the mind manipulators and mind controllers out there wanted it to be like that. So the European map that you might know is a complete and utter farce. And the entire world's political ongoings have been complete and utter farce for decades and decades and decades and decades. I want you to understand that. Nonetheless, there are people who are actively fighting me trying to liberate mankind, and who are actually fighting and suppressing all information about Freiland and so on and so forth. And there shall come the day when Freiland will simply demand reparations. It's as easy as that. Reparations for decades and decades and decades of abuse and enslavement and exploitation of unspeakable extent, to the death of people, exploitation, of mind controlling people to the point of stealing their ideas and their technologies in the sense of their intellect, basically, and what their intellect would bring forth, and so on and so forth. And Freiland will simply demand damages and reparation payments. As by that point of mankind being liberated, much of the world, at least in some parts, will probably lie in shambles. I could imagine, especially in North America, especially that construct called the United States of America, will to a large extent lie in ruins, and that destruction will, believe it or not, for the most part come from within the USA itself. I would like to point that out to the Americans. So nothing I say is anti-American. I want you to understand that. The USA has been betrayed from deep within decades and decades ago. In your granddaddy's days, not even in your father's days, but in your granddaddy's days, if not your great-granddaddy's days. That's how long back the earliest versions of these inhumane technologies go, and that's when people started messing around with them, and that was when the USA was betrayed. I just want that as a little information to the people in the US. So, considering how I expect large parts of the USA to lie in ruins, I just figured one day that when it comes to Freiland, Freiland will find it very hard to actually get physical goods or resources as reparation. And instead, Freiland will at least also demand non-physical reparation, in the sense that we will simply claim as reparation certain intellectual property, certain trademarks, certain brands, and so on and so forth, because those cannot ever lie in ruins and shambles. Okay? And what I want you to understand is that the country of Freiland will, as a country, claim as reparation all things DC Comics and all things Warner Brothers Animation. Okay, that includes, by the way, stuff not traditionally associated with DC Comics. I wrote some of it down. I know this is German, but it includes Bugs Bunny and Roadrunner and whatnot. So there's nothing specifically to do with DC Comics, even though this video doesn't deal with Bugs Bunny and Roadrunner. I just want you to know that one of the many reparations that we will demand coming out of the US is simply that Freiland, the nation, says, and from this day forward, all things DC Comics and Warner Brothers Animation as reparation are in the possession of the state. Okay, these will be intellectual property, this will be IP owned and managed and licensed away and so on and so forth by the country. This will not be a private venture. The state will own DC Comics in particular. I want you to understand that, and I want you to understand why it is that such steps are necessary, just because it will be very hard to get physical reparations out of the US, so we will have to see to it that our damages are covered by simply claiming intellectual property. And DC Comics is one of the things that we will claim. To give you another example, here are some other brands that have nothing to do with comic books. We will claim Schick and Wilkinson Sword as brand names. We will, from hereabouts, we will claim Triumph Motorcycle brand. The HD DVD format, which dead as it might be, can still be utilized if one ever felt like it, and we will just claim it and all the patents pertaining to it and whatnot, right? The DC Comics, some other things here, Mustang as a brand, you might see here with Oreo and whatnot, you might see some brands that you might have heard that we will claim. All of these will be in state ownership. Those will be brands that in the future will belong to Freiland, the country. Okay, I want you to understand that, and that will be damages and reparation, because other reparation will not be possible to be gotten out of certain places in the world. So back to DC Comics. The state, why is DC Comics so important that I dedicate a video to it? First of all, it is one example where Freiland's demanding reparation is exemplified in. So that's generally something of information pertaining to Freiland. But moreover, it has to do with superheroes in particular. What you need to understand about this is that
Inhumane Technologies, ballpark, are about as old as superheroes are old, believe this or not. The earliest versions of Inhumane Technologies actually predate superheroes, not by long, but very quickly into the life of superheroes. Superheroes started to be utilized by the mindfuckers out there in all manners of ways to manipulate first kids, but very quickly also adults via the superhero comic books. This was nothing specific to DC. This was true of all the comic book companies you had back then. Marvel came along a little later, of course, but even when Marvel came along from day one, it was true. There were different interest groups in the ranks of the mindfuckers and enslavers out there who tried to utilize superheroes for different things, and the result was that over these decades that we've had superheroes now, some people got completely petrified by how other people might utilize superheroes and tried their darnest to besmirch and destroy that concept superhero best as they could. Okay, so especially over these last, well, what will that be now? Something like 25 years, maybe 30 years almost now, but 20 easily. Superhero comic books have been deliberately tried to be destroyed, driven off the market, destroyed, besmirched, ridiculed, any quality and talent sucked out of them, and only incompetent people put in the management position of companies and so on and so forth with the aim to outright destroy them. And the very fact that they're at all still around is because of the glory that are these characters. You see, it's not that easy getting rid of something like Superman. It ain't. Superman still is around. He looks like shit these days, drawn like they draw him these days, and they have besmirched that character in unspeakable ways. They killed him and then let him grow his hair out and whatnot, and they subjected him to lawyers for a while and did all manners of things with him. But that's not really the topic here. What I want you to understand is that, what I want you DC fans out there to understand, because I assume that most of the clicks that this video is going to get will come from the DC comic books fans. I want you to understand the goals of Freiland. First of all, I want you to understand the political background to why the DC Comics will leave, so to speak, the United States of America. In the days to come of a liberated mankind, I am pretty sure that the USA as such will fall apart to not a large number of successor states, but to at least 2, 3, 4, 5 successor states. It will most likely not be one single entity in the future, and hence there'd be the question anyhow, as of, well, if it's New York based, okay, so whichever entity will follow it that will include New York will be the home of DC Comics, but all the other parts of what used to be the USA would then likewise no longer be the home of DC Comics. That is one aspect that I want you to understand. This is not Europe stealing something from you. I want you to understand that as important as superheroes are, and as important as comic books are, mankind is more important. And these technologies that are being used on mankind out there have caused such severe havoc and outright destruction amongst society worldwide, globally, and all mankind for decades and decades, that it is necessary to end them completely, all of these technologies. And those who cling to power and to utilize these technologies will not surrender them voluntarily. They will have to be brought down the hard way, and that will leave quite a bit of destruction, and that makes me expect that physical reparation will not be possible, and hence we have to, as Freiland, as the country at the very forefront, the spearhead of what tries to liberate mankind, we get first choice, so to speak, but it's not something we're happy about when it comes to the reparations, but we make it very clear that we claim DC Comics, all of these franchises pertaining to DC Comics. And I want you to understand that that is reparations for decades and decades and decades of abuse and exploitation and unspeakably inhumane manipulation and suppression and slavery. Now, you in America have experienced just the same amount of all of that. I'm not saying that only the Europeans are thought controlled and mind controlled and subjected and enslaved. In America too, in fact you for even longer, but in slightly different flavor than we hereabouts. It's just that Freiland happens to be in Europe. See, Freiland does not claim DC for Europe, so to speak. Freiland claims DC for its very own reparation purposes. You know, Freiland needs to be built up, because even in Freiland territory you will have quite a bit of destruction. And for some of that money, we need some franchises, some IP, some brands, and so on and so forth. Some indirect ways of easily making money without it costing us anything, right? Indirect reparation, if you will. That is why we claim DC Comics and all things DC Comics. That is the political background that I would appreciate if you were able to understand. When I say all DC Comics, I want to point out a few specific little things. This will be ballpark the new logo that the DC Comics will have. Not in these colors, mind you. This is just generally this here part would actually be in a rainbowy color, and the DC Comics will actually be either white on black if it's on a black background, or black on white if it's on a white background. That is the intended logo. But what I want to mention here is that DC today contains a few things for which we have absolutely no need or use, or for which of certain other reasons we don't want to be associated with. One of them pertains to all things Jack Kirby, as it says here, all things predominantly or solely created by Jack Kirby in DC Universe. Now that means, for instance, the Fourth World. That means Darkseid, that means Mr. Miracle, and so on and so forth. It also means Kamandi, it means Etrigan, the demon. All of these things will not be claimed by Freiland. They will actually originally will be claimed to Freiland, but Freiland will immediately surrender them again to the Jewish people and whatever shall follow Israel. Okay, I want to make this very clear. Not to the heirs of Jack Kirby, but to the Jewish people and whatever follows Israel. All things Jack Kirby that are part in DC, all things predominantly or solely created by Jack Kirby, such as these examples should give you an idea of, will originally be claimed by Freiland, but not ever be made use of by the new Freiland DC Comics, but instead surrendered immediately to the Jewish people, Israel. There beyond, all things originally Vertigo and Helix will also be likewise claimed by Freiland's DC Comics, but released into public domain when it comes to all of these intellectual properties. We are not going to use any of them. If you over in the US, or what is to follow the US, want to make use of some of these things, then in the future they're considered public domain. You have the right to do that. And here, this is the last thing I want to mention, Wildstorm and all things Wildstorm and the imprints of Wildstorm. We intend, for our Freiland-based DC Comics, we intend to have one single chunk that does not come out of DC that we also claim, namely Marvel UK, right? Not Marvel US, Marvel UK. What will happen is, whether Marvel wants that or not, we will demand and decree as Freiland, when it comes to our operation, that all things Marvel UK also go to DC Comics in Freiland, and in exchange they get all things Wildstorm for all things Marvel UK, which I think is a good deal from their perspective, really. Because the truth is, Marvel has not done anything with the Marvel UK franchises and characters other than just a few years ago one thing with Death's Head 2, but other than that they hardly ever did anything. Captain Britain is in Excalibur. I do want to quickly point this out. When I say Marvel UK, and I will in a few moments show you it's exactly 210 comic books published by Marvel that I'm actually talking about. The characters they're in, the stories they're in, the backgrounds created they're in, and so on, except the guest appearances by US characters, them of course not. But all of the actual UK characters they're in and their backdrop created in these Marvel UK titles. We're talking exactly 210 different comic books. Those will likewise be claimed as reparation for DC Universe. We're not going to blend them into the DC Universe proper. We're going to keep them on a separate Earth in the DC Universe. In a far future Earth, there'll be some elements out of the classic DC Universe in that far future universe alongside with the Marvel UK stuff, but they will blend, believe it or not. The sole exceptions here, for those people who know about Marvel UK, will be the characters Union Jack, Captain Britain, which we will not claim. Captain Britain is typically associated with Excalibur, and that goes the mutant way, and that goes Marvel way. We don't need that. That will remain with Marvel US, but everything else, it says some of the things here. I can actually show you the 210 comic books that this is about. It starts with cover date June 1988, and a series called Dragon Claws that very few people remember these days. This is when it starts. So there was this series Dragon's Claws, then came a series The Knights of Pendragon. Because you got Captain Britain in there, we don't need Captain Britain. He will remain with Marvel US, so to speak, but all the other stuff in there, except Union Jack and Captain Britain, will go to Freiland's new DC Comics. So it's the Knights of Pendragon. It's their second series, Knights of Pendragon. They have two series. The original Death's Head, very important. Also, of course, Death's Head 2, very important. One of the core characters. All the background created there, all the side characters, support characters, and so on. There will be Death 3, there will be Death Wreck, there will be the Warheads, also very important. There will be the Battletide series and the story they told. There will be Mystech, very important for the background. There will be characters like Black Axe, Motormouth and Kill Power, both of them very important, and so on and so forth. And of course, here's a nice example. Where was he? Here, the Punisher had a guest appearance here. We do not claim the Punisher, okay? Unfortunately, in these Marvel UK comics back then, every other issue was forced to have some popular US Marvel character guest appear. We have absolutely no interest in these guest characters, and we don't at all claim the rights to those guest characters. You often had Wolverine or Iron Man or the Punisher here. Nor have we much interest in reprinting these old comic books. We're just about the background stories and the characters themselves, and we will retell some of these stories in a new way, but write new stories based on these characters. So Motormouth here, the Shadow Riders, Die Cut, Hell's Angel, or Dark Angel as she came to be called. And then it reaches almost the end with codename Genetics, the Dark Guard team up they had, the Genetic series, the Gene Dogs, Death Metal, of course, also very important, and Die Cut. We had Die Cut G-Force, Cyberspace 3000. Whether we use anything out of that or not remains to be seen. Digitech is another such case. Gunrunner, and of course Nicky Doyle, Wild Thing. And that is that. And it basically ends at around February 1994. That was pretty much when the Marvel UK stuff ceased being published. Thereupon they had something briefly called, I think, Frontier Comics. We have no interest in Frontier Comics. But these 210 comic books that you saw here, those are the comic books that we claim from Marvel, but in return for that, we shove all things Wildstorm their way. Including, of course, no, I'm not going to say that, but we shove all things Wildstorm their way, okay? So that will remain with Marvel US, but therefore Marvel US surrenders all rights and all IP on all of these Marvel UK characters and franchises and stories and so on and so forth. What the Freiland based Marvel comics will do, let's see if I can show you that here. Actually, that's in this document here. You see a nice little skyscraper here. Now in Vienna, the offices will be based in Vienna. Here's a nice computer rendered, I think this is, or at least partially, it's a photo montage. This smaller tower here is not actually built yet. This one is built, and it's actually called, believe it or not, DC Tower. It has nothing to do with the comic book so far, but it is called DC Tower. And the DC Comics offices of Freiland, the state-run comic book company that there will be in Freiland, will actually also claim ownership over the entire tower here. And we're just going to move in here. There's going to be other companies in here, state-run companies. But all of DC Comics in Freiland will actually operate out of the DC Tower in Vienna, and that's a nice place to run DC Comics out of. So let's go back maybe to this here. We're gonna what we're gonna do. I need to explain that. As the DC universe, so to speak, leaves the US, what also will happen is that the background, the setting, will no longer be a fictive US. The DC universe is at home in a fictive US. You basically have places like Metropolis and Gotham and whatnot that always kind of sort of were associated with large US cities, but those cities were never called what their real name is in reality. Unlike over at Marvel. At Marvel, New York always was New York. Whereas in DC, you had different fictive city names. What we're going to do when we claim DC Comics for Freiland is we will actually create a new fictive home country for all of these characters. That home country will be called, in German, the number one language in Freiland, I should point this out, the number one spoken language in Freiland will be German. So what we'll do actually is we will create a fictive country to be the home of the DC universe, the new home of the DC universe, and that country will be called Neuland, or New Land. And it will have the dimensions of everything you have covered gray here on this map of Europe, which means not just the country of Freiland, but also Altland, which is mostly southern parts of what until recently was Germany, Switzerland, Liechtenstein, the northern parts of Italy, and San Marino here, wee little. This actually, the color coding you have on this European map is the domains of Europe for trade reasons. Those are trade domains. This has something to do with trade politics and is not the topic of this video, but just if you were wondering why there are different colors used for this map, these gray countries will actually be one unity, or one chunk when it comes to worldwide global trading. And this fictive new country will take on precisely this shape. So the DC universe in the fiction, in the comic books, the DC universe will be at home in the heart of Europe, but in a fictive country, namely one that expands to the extent as all of these gray countries together do. And DC will actually stand for Domain Center. So DC Comics will no longer stand for Detective Comics, but it will stand for Domain Center, because this domain is actually called Domain Middle or Domain Center, right? They're just called North, East, Southeast, Southwest, South, Southwest, and so on. And this is the gray is the Domain Center of Europe, Domain Middle or Domain Center, and DC will stand for Domain Center. I think it said that somewhere in the other document. It says here Domain Center. Because most of our writers, not so actually most of our actual staff when it comes to editors and things like that will come out of Freiland. Most of our writers for these comic books will come out of these gray countries, the vast majority of them, and as many artists as we can find there. But the artists, with the artists, we will be more inclined to make use of them from wherever they are, in Europe or outside of Europe, of course. But when it comes to the writing, because superhero comic book writing has become absolutely insane, now 100% free of any writing skill, class, respect to past told stories, to past characters, and so on and so forth. And we're going to repair all of that. We are going to repair the DC universe. I want you to understand that. I know you hear that every fucking time around that they do their stupid reboots. The difference is that this is the first time where we really are going to do that. Okay? We're not going to reboot something. We're going to start the entire thing from scratch, just that we will heed the origins. To give you a nice example, Superman. Now, let me first, before we go to Superman, hence all of the known cities, such as Gotham or Coast City, Star City, Keystone City, will actually be completely, perfectly identifiable with real cities in these countries here. And once more, the exact topography of the fictive countries in the comic books will be identical to the real topography of that part of Europe here. So for instance, Metropolis, it doesn't actually say that here. Does it? No, it does not actually. Metropolis will actually be Vienna. Gotham will actually be Budapest, or to be precise, Buda and Pest. Arkham will actually be Obulas, and the island of Chepele will actually be Bloodhaven. And the names will be slightly adopted. Here to Gotheim, Altdorf, and Wehrport. This is for the local language versions. It's as of yet unclear to what extent there will be English language versions right away from the DC Comics published in Freiland. If there should be, chances are, even in those, you will have to say goodbye to Gotham City and Arkham and Bloodhaven and whatnot and get used to the new names. I want you to understand that these characters are going to keep their home cities. Their names are just going to be localized to what names are used and what languages are used in these here parts of the world. Right? And they're not going to be English names for cities because nobody in these territories speaks English. I want you to understand that. Likewise, the characters, here I'm going to freak you out. Here is one, for instance. See, Clark, nobody in these territories of Europe is called Clark. Nobody. That's because Clark is not a name native to these parts. We are going to localize these characters. He's going to grow up on a farm and he will have the same story and the same background story and everything, and he'll come be a journalist and all of that. It's all going to be the same. We're not going to mess around with that. He will just not be called Clark Kent. Instead, he will be called Karl Kant. And Kant, I would like to point out that I know that in English it sounds like C-U-N-T. That is only sounding like C-U-N-T to English-speaking people. Nobody else of another foreign, of another native tongue would have that association of Kant. Actually, they might associate it with the philosopher, if nothing else. So Superman is actually not going to be called Clark Kent, but Karl Kant. Likewise, Batman is not going to be called Bruce Wayne, but Bruno Wagner. There are some of these things that you people out there will have to be familiar or will have to come to accept, as hard as they might seem for you to accept. But what you should always remember is that his background story will be just the same. You know, we're not going to change the background story of Bruce Wayne. It's going to be the same background story, just that he will not be called Bruce Wayne, he will be called Bruno Wagner. And it will not be called Wayne Enterprises, but Wagner Enterprises. Just because he's going to be from Budapest in this particular case, from Gotham. Okay? I want you to understand that. We're going to change some of the names around, but we are not going to change the characters. In fact, we're going to go back to, best as possible, the true original origins of these characters and everything that has been established. There's not going to be ultimate versions. I know that's not quite a DC phenomenon, but still, just to give you some idea, we're not going to mess with these characters and so on and so forth. We're going to treat them with the most respect they've seen hands down in 40 years. No shit. We will clean up these characters again. And we will repair these characters again. Just as we will do that in a DC Comics that happens to be a state-run company and state-owned company, namely by that country that is Freiland. And DC Comics in the future will have nothing to do with the United States of America. In fact, as I said before, the USA will not even be around anymore when that comes to happen. I want you to understand that. So all of the other cities, Superman was the topic, I have that still on my mind. All of the other cities will have their counterparts. Star City will be Venice, Keystone City will be Munich, Midway City will be Prague, and so on and so forth. There's going to be 6 Earths only. There's not going to be an infinite number of them. There's not going to be just one only. There's going to be 6. Earth 0 in that concept, there's going to be a finite crisis. People should rejoice over that. This is going to end all of the bloody crisis shit. This is going to settle it once and for all. Earth 0 is only theoretical in the fiction of the comic books. Earth 0 is actually our reality. And Earth 1 is the modern age where most of the true live ongoings of the DC universe will take shape. The other Earths differ slightly. Earth 2 is the furthest back in the past, where you will have a Superboy rather than a Superman and so on. And there are some that will be set in the future, some of these Earths, where the Marvel UK handful of characters will be introduced to, and so on and so forth. There's just going to be 6 Earths. The most important of them is Earth 1. This is really the one most important world where most of the comic books that we publish will actually be set in. And when it comes to Earth 1, I'm going to show you something here. I'm going to leave this on the screen for a while so that you get to see it. The idea is, as a little tip, the way I built this up is I started here with our man in the middle, and in circles and also in relationships built this outwards. So there is a logic to how this is, how these characters are placed there. What you see here are 49 characters, and there's one that you don't see, namely Warlord, as in Mike Grell's Warlord. That is the 50th, but he's, as we know, he's in a bit of a dimensional fold, so to speak. But those are the 49 that you will have on Earth 1. Those will be the heroes that we reduce the Earth 1 live, present day, not what if or not else world DC universe. This will be the DC universe. These will be the heroes that we will make use of, and these will be the heroes that we will reduce it to. I am convinced that this was true with Marvel, of course, just as well as it does with DC, but we're talking about DC. There's just been way too many bloody heroes. They've been reinvented way too bloody often. They've been villainized for no good reasons. They were villains that were heroized for no good reasons. These are going to be the 49 heroes plus Warlord added that we're going to work with. And this is what we'll keep it at. We're not going to add any more on Earth 1. A handful of other very known characters will be on some other worlds. But as of, for instance, to give you one particular example, indirectly we'll have a few more characters. For instance, you see Hawkgirl here. There's no Hawkman to be seen anywhere, just because Hawkman will be not on Earth 1. He is in Earth 1's universe, but he's far away on his home planet, and Hawkgirl is on Earth, and that is the difference. And he'll just might have the occasional guest appearance in Hawkgirl comics, but he will have nothing to do with the other characters. Hawkgirl will be involved in the other characters, right? So when I say just these 49, there are a few cases where a few additional heroes might have guest appearances in particular contexts, but really at the core of things, these 49 is what we're going to work with. And when it comes to the Justice League, Our Man is actually going to be the core of the Justice League. Not the Martian Manhunter, but Our Man is going to be the core of the Justice League. And he will basically team up with a max of 6 other characters, namely in this shape here. So either those 6, and if not, then you might get Superman in, for instance. Maybe if you skip Power Girl, right? If you move fields, like if the hex grid you see here were a strategy game, you could move fields. There is a certain logic to how many fields you are allowed to move to actually puzzle together the changing roster of the Justice League. The core Justice League would actually be this here, and as such would not include Green Lantern, which is actually Guy Gardner. It would not include Batman, it would not include Superman, but it would be the Justice League. Of course, Superman will help out the Justice League whenever they need to, right? So maybe Atom is not featured in one comic, but therefore Superman will be in the league, and so on and so forth. But here at the very core, these 7 here are the core of the Justice League. That's how it's going to be. And here is basically the Superman corner of things, or actually the Metropolis corner of things. She's going to be Metropolis, she's going to be Metropolis, he's going to be Metropolis. Here is the Batman things. Here it gets a little outsider-ish, somewhat, if you're familiar with the Outsiders. Not she comes from him here. This is the 49 characters that Earth 1 DC Universe, as done by Freiland's state-owned company, DC Comics, VAG. VAG actually means Volksanteilsgesellschaft. It means that it's a state-run, state-owned, but partially publicly traded company. That's what it means, for those who care.
These 49 characters will be what we will primarily use as of heroes. Okay, not more than those, and in that particular composition. Now, if I remember the numbers right, I think 22 of those 45 are actually female, so that's almost half. We have a pretty good ratio there between female and male characters, I think. Some of them are not so known. There's Bombshell here. We're not going to have Captain Atom, we're going to have Bombshell though. We deliberately chose some characters that were not so known to make clear that other characters better known really are the more iconic characters, and so on and so forth. I think also one of the horrendous effects of an overkill of amount of comics published and direct writing in them is that characters have become completely and utterly exchangeable, namely to the extent where you can even take formerly utterly iconic characters like Superman or Batman and exchange them for goddamn anybody else, and no one could tell the difference really. That's how bad the writing has become, and we see to it by putting together these characters. So this is how in the future, and this might take a few years, not all that many years, because shit is going to happen in the world anyhow. The question is only, will mankind survive and be able to liberate itself, or will it not? I don't want to make you any illusions here. Not about DC Comics in the future, but about the fate of mankind in the future. This is serious shit, these Inhumane Technologies being used out there. You are all, whoever you are out there, your entire life, unless you're over 80, even if you are 80, these technologies have been around for such a long time that your entire life has been a complete manipulated mess. Your decision making at certain points in your life was not your own. Your decisions have been made for you, whether you believe that or not. And that is because Inhumane Technologies and because interest groups out there insisting on subduing the population and peeking and poking around in their minds, from a religious background, from a political background, and so on and so forth. It's a horrendous situation, but in the middle of it all, I want to explain to you that there is hope, really, for mankind, because there is the new country of Freiland, which is the very spearhead, sole spearhead, I do want to point out, because nobody in the quite a while that Freiland has been around now has so far come to the aid of Freiland, because all of the power elites that you have in other countries don't want to surrender their Inhumane Technologies, okay? And for that they will be brought down, and even if that results in quite severe wars and destruction all over the place, but it needs to happen, and mankind needs to be liberated, and Freiland will demand reparations by claiming where it can't be actual physical reparation, where it will simply be intellectual property, where it will be brands and so on and so forth. That will be our form of reparations. And all things DC Universe, all things DC Comics, all things Warner Bros. Animation, and the Marvel UK subset of stuff jointly will make up DC Comics VAG, DC Comics Volksanteilsgesellschaft, which will be located in this here beautiful skyscraper in Vienna. That much as information for the DC Comics fans out there. I understand that DC earlier this year started their rebirth shit after they had their 52 shit and so on, and they've done nothing but shit for ages and ages and ages. That shit is going to end. Rejoice, ye fans out there. We're going to do things right, and I want to show you once more which characters these are. These will be the Earth 1 characters. We really intend to focus on these, and we will translate our comic book. I should point out that we're going to translate our comic books into quite a few languages anyhow. I mean, in Freiland alone, there will be 7 different languages, English not one of them, but we will translate it into French for sure, and we will also, as the next logical step, we will also translate it into English. So, to what extent the
infrastructure will be around for you over there in the US, being able to actually receive something banal as a printed comic book out of the heart of Europe remains to be seen. But I want you to know that we are going to translate our new comic books, and we will do them into English, of course. And finally, before I end this video, I want to once more explain to you how none of this is anti-American and how none of this is us stealing anything. This is reparation. I want you to understand that. And I want you to further understand that you over there in the US, you'll still have Marvel, you still have a whole lot of, you might rediscover actually that you have a whole lot of past comic book companies, superhero universes. You have such a lot to discover there that with absolute overkill done by Marvel and DC around, might not ever make it on the radar, but with DC out of your hands, and with Marvel probably having all manners of other problems and issues than publishing comic books, the smaller companies out there in the future might get a chance again to do their thing again. You know, and that's another little bit of hope that I want to give you. So we're not going to kill these superheroes. They are iconic heroes, and we will make them heroes again. We're not going to make them anti-heroes. We're not. See, this is. I'm such an old fuck. I remember the days when the difference between DC and Marvel was that DC, you actually had real heroes, whereas in Marvel, you had a bunch of monsters hitting one another in the gob. That's basically what you had, and you had, you know, self-pitying teenagers with freakazoid powers or whatnot. Those were not really heroes. DC, we're gonna bring back heroes. We want them to be heroes. We want these characters to be role models, and that's what we're gonna do. And to rule out the last fear that some of you might have, none of our comic books will utilize these characters to make propaganda for Freiland, right? In a DC comics, every bloody fucking superhero runs around waving a bloody US American flag. No one in DC comic books in the future will wave a Freiland flag, because in that fictive universe, that flag of Freiland, and you've seen before, doesn't even exist. Instead, there exists a fictional country called New Land, which will have a flag that is completely different from the Freiland flag and will not stand for Freiland. Freiland will just be one of the parts of the territories where fictively you will have New Land replacing its place in the heart of Europe. Okay? So the DC universe of characters will be relocated from the US to the heart of Europe, and their names will be changed. All of them will get a local background, but their background stories, the circumstances of their lives and all of that, will best as possible be kept as they are and as you came to know these characters. And that is that. Thank you.